Hi, I'm Blaze. This video is actually the second part of another video where I talk more about Dimitri and his wacky shenanigans. Did you know that his entire segment talking about who created Bridget is just wrong? The first part sets up some context for some of the points I bring up here, so I implore you to watch that. Or not. I'm not your mom. But speaking of context, to quickly catch up on some of the next points, Dimitri starts to talk about Strive as a game and the various changes it made. Now that we're all cut up, begin.
Many things about this game were compromised to reach the widest audience possible by basically every metric. This can be seen at the very core of the game. Even as someone who is not at all competitive, I dropped Strive immediately on console and was only willing to give it a second chance on PC with Bridget's DLC due to early excitement. But the foundation of the game is just so watered down, mechanically, in an attempt to appeal to that widest audience. The developers even stated their goal is to make a fighting game that you don't need to practice. What is appealing about that?
I'd agree with you, if that's what they actually meant. The actual article, which quick nitpick, Dimitri credits the article's date as September 5th, and that's technically right, but that's when the interview was held. Then the actual article was posted, and something that would have been much easier to search for, by the way, is September 30th. But anyways, there was another paragraph posted before the quote Dimitri showed that has some much needed context, because in case you don't know, people usually don't start the sentences with however. Here's a line. Our aim was to make a game that rewarded effort. Meaningful game design is one that has complex details built into it. This is a very core of the Guilty Gear series. We will not make a game that portrays the hard work of those who put in the time and effort into the game. That paints quite a different picture from what Dimitri showed, once again. While Strive was made to be much easier, they reiterate constantly throughout the article that they want to reward those who put in the effort, or practice. Devs ultimately want to make Strive easier to get into, but still require effort to get really good at it. Pay attention to the latter part of the counter statement. Have an easier time reading the stage where they can actually play a match. New players will still have to practice, but if X requires 10 hours of training mode to play a match, Strive would only require 2 hours. Even in prior interviews, they made it clear that Strive would still require effort in order to reach a high level of play. So while you can disagree with the overall sentiment they express here, the devs' goal was to make something that requires 0 practice, and it's just another instance of Dimitri cherry picking.
It's not that this is a rarity among modern fighting games, mind you. Many try and many fail as a result, in terms of fan reception. Even in cases like Street Fighter V, where they sell well due to fighting game players being peak consumers, that find the need to always buy and support products they shit on, because it's still the current running tournament game.
I know that you said you were no expert on fighting games, but man, is this point bad. It's easy to say that Street Fighter V sold well in 2023, after years of updates and fixes to issues fans were complaining about since launch, things like input lag, graphics, single-player content, and the list goes on. Street Fighter V addressed those through tons of patches, but not from the start. Dimitri presents the idea that Street Fighter V sold very well at launch, which just isn't true. Capcom themselves admitted that the game fell short of their expectations sales-wise. Fans were displeased and didn't just mindly consume. Fans only started to turn around on the game after it fixed so many issues. I know me saying Dimitri's cutting crap starting to get annoying, but I really want to put into perspective just how disingenuous and ignorant he is. Because what do you have to be taking to say something like Street Fighter V was liked and sold well at launch?
Though, perhaps more pertinent to our discussion, is something that the small group that champions Strive currently is happy to sweep under the rug. See, when the game was initially released, it had references in its glossaries to Taiwan, Tibet, and other nations, that were then censored to appease the Chinese government in a future update, a common practice among companies trying to portray a progressive image. While this was once a well-known facet of the game, there are actually some further oddities that relate to it that aren't so well known. Testament, another character that can be described as a femboy, actually has some concept art depicting them as more masculine, showing a completely different direction for the character. Like Bridget though, they decided this character was no longer a guy for Strive, meaning they took the both and only characters that can be considered feminine men and made them women, or at least, not men. Coincidentally, feminine men around this time also became banned as a thing you could portray in media in China. Am I alluding that this was ultimately one of the reasons Bridget was changed? Well, no. I certainly think it could be a contributing factor, and is some food for thought.
So, the China argument. My favorite. You mentioned it as a possibility, but just how possible is it? So, I'm finally glad you decided to bring up Testament, my homie, but you don't acknowledge how their new identity was handled, unlike with Bridget. But I suppose it wouldn't be nearly as effective, as your initial take on Testament being a femboy is very spotty. There are some old interviews from Daisuke where he states that Testament is androgynous, but finding a source for these is pretty hard as they were in a physical format and nobody cares to digitally preserve them. Luckily, Ozawa, our favorite marketing director, can come to the rescue. He streamed when Testament came out and said that in prior games, Testament was considered to be androgynous in the past, in his own words, expressing both genders. The old design really reflected that. So really, you could always describe Testament as being a non-man or non-woman or whatever the heck you want to say. But I really want to investigate the concept art argument because it really shows how poor his research is. First off, I just hate concept art arguments, characters having different designs from their concept art is very common. You can see this across tons of media. Concept art is art meant to represent an idea, but it's also something that will probably change later on. But that's pretty relevant here, as Dimitri and other anti-Bridgets are far too busy looking to the right, they should be looking a little left. That design is far from masculine. Testament limbs are covered up, making it very hard to tell what gender they are. Almost if they have no gender rose above the concept. Heck, as Jiyuna said, the masculine design was a new change of pace for the character, so the idea or concept of playing with Testament's gender was already there. Can you really claim that the new design is a radical change when it was already established that they weren't going to stick to the same thing? But I mentioned Dimitri's research being dog water earlier, and well, Dimitri implies that the change in model was due to China's femboy ban, at least inspired by it, but what Dimitri and others would love to swipe under the rug is that the design was actually teased in Strive's story mode. At the very end, we can see this shot of Kai and Ram. If you look in the very back, you can see Testament with the same design they had on release. This was back in Strive's initial release of June of 2021. Month before the ban happened. While I know people like to joke about Daisuke being a god, I highly doubt that he foresaw this happening and changed Testament while still keeping in other things that would make China upset and they'd have to censor. Regardless of what you think, the facts show that the design change wasn't due to a ban. No, I really want to see the math of that possibility you mentioned, because I think I have a better possibility of getting struck by lightning while dancing naked than China being the actual reason. In fact, why do you even believe that? I want to talk about inconsistencies again. So a while back, Dimitri made a video called The Crimes of Modern Localization, mostly talking about, well, you guessed it, the fall of the Roman Empire, the ways in which translators have ruined anime and games. In that video, he ends up bringing up Karina Botinger, a voice actor most known for their role as Paimon in Genshin Impact. Dimitri also talked about their bad behavior towards fans, but something in particular caught my eye.
There's a few other instances, but the one I find most interesting is when they insist that the character they voice is agendered. That MiHoYo specifically told them this, not that it's their headcanon, or some fan fictitious idea they like. Just fact. I'm very sure the Chinese company said that Paimon is agendered.
Dimitri laughs at the idea of China being okay with an agender character. Bear that to now, where he's insisting that China is the reason why we have an agender or non-binary character. But that was years ago. That was years ago, I hear someone say. And you're right, his opinion must have surely changed, right? There's like no way that he would still believe that, and I don't know, he would bring up the exact same clip in his previous Bridget video, right?
You have Bridget's English voice actress tweeting out that the character is trans, and this isn't the first of its kind, where we see a voice actor speaking on behalves they do not have. Viewers will remember, not too long ago, that the Paimon English voice actor from Genshin Impact, the Chinese mobile game, made claims her character was non-binary. A verifiably false statement. Reverse the situation. How would you feel if you heard a feminine male character in an English production was changed to a woman in the Chinese localization?
So we're from dismissing the idea of China making a trans character to fully believing that China would accept a trans character. What changed? Did new info come out and China is suddenly fine with trans characters? If so, why not bring it up? It's like that proof doesn't exist and Dimitri's aware of it. I really don't think Dimitri is as well versed in foreign LGBT issues as he'd like you to believe. But let's ignore everything I said for a second. The reason China did a femboy ban is because they wanted to enforce a more traditional view of masculinity. If Daisuke and the crew were really afraid of that law, then why make them trans and non-binary in the first place? Both of those things are the farthest from any traditional view of gender, much less masculinity, that China seems to value so much. That whole argument was stupid from the word go, and I think I understand why Dimitri phrased Testament and Bridget as non-men. Because saying Arctis made a trans and non-binary character to appease China is something so stupid that you wouldn't be able to say it with a straight face. Though that does bring up a question about Dimitri's logic. Dimitri now says that China is cool with trans characters and decided not to acknowledge why he believes that. If he now thinks that China's okay with that, let's use that same thing he applied to Daisuke. That would either mean that he was lying in the past or he's lying right now. I hope it's latter, because if it's the former, then that would mean he just made up that info from his previous vids. You know, between this and that trans flag from earlier, Dimitri seems to have a bad habit of making up information in order to justify harassing trans people in particular. Totally normal behavior there, buddy. Why are people calling Dimitri a bigot again? Though, actually, the argument that Strive is trying to pander to China is really funny because the femboy ban thing came with a lot of other bans and other things that Strive surely would have had to follow, according to Dimitri's logic. A lot of these bans were compiled by niche gamer who totally wouldn't agree with a video that actually goes against something they know is false, right? Me when I'm in a having no morals competition, my opponent is an anti-Bridget. Inconsistencies aside, let's highlight a few, shall we? There's the ban on blood and red color hit effects. Nago has blood hit effects, and that's tied to a special blood meter, which if it gets filled, Nago goes into a blood rage mode, this blade is coded. and blood. Testament also breaks this rule, as their Skype is made from the blood of their succubus they fight with other bloody monsters. By the way, I'd like to remind you that Testament was added in after these rules were put into place. Anyways, noting the words kill, shoot, or dead. Bridget also breaks this rule. Again, the devs do this on purpose. Character class that is violent: assassin, hitman, and pirate. Billy and Zato are assassins, and May fulfills the pirate role. Also, a previous rule banned games that allowed bounty hunting, so I'd like to wager that bounty hunters also aren't an okay class either, so we can add Soul and Bridget to the list. Heck, we even see Soul bounty hunting in the story as well, using impolite language.
Be my bottom, bitch!
Eat shit!
No female characters holding a pipe, Riken. No characters descending deity. The climax of the story mode has Ino become a god. Also, once again, various characters are also called acts like god. For a game that you argue panders to China, they sure love to break China's rules, ensuring that they'll never get a Chinese release. Now, before I end this point, I'd like to point out that Genshin Impact, a Chinese game, has also faced similar censorship issues to Strive. Heck, they even had two of their characters used as an example of the femboy ban. Despite that, they haven't censored or altered those femboys in the slightest. Genshin is no stranger to changing stuff in order to comply with China's rules, like changing the outfits for certain girl characters. Yet, Genshin never changed these boys. While I'm no stranger in Chinese law, if Genshin, a game made and developed in China, didn't have to change their characters, then why would Strive be so worried that they would change theirs? I won't argue that Strive censoring stuff for China is bad. I also won't get upset at somebody for worrying about the future of Strive and other Arc System Works games, as there is a possibility that the censorship issue comes back and is way worse. And even as a fan of theirs, I have to say, ArcSys, if your most popular character is a trans character, maybe don't appeal to people that hate them. Just a suggestion. But I can say with confidence that China didn't affect Bridget, and that anybody that's saying otherwise either doesn't know what they're talking about or is lying, or both.
It should be stated that Bridget was not popular anywhere outside of Japan. To speak in specifics, we can look at Guilty Gear's popularity poll, where he would rarely ever squeeze a numbered placement in the West. Conversely, he would sit at number 1 overseas consistently.
What do you mean by consistently? You're acting as if you've shown multiple polls when you've only shown one. See, there is another poll, but that one shows how outdated this one is. In the new poll, we can see that while Japan is still the number 1 Bridget fan, she's placed much higher overall with Western players. Funnily enough, the US is the second region where she's the most popular. I'm wondering why you didn't show this one, as this poll was in the same article where the devs specified Bridget's gender. So either you, once again, didn't read an article that you featured in your own video, or you're cherry picking.
While in contrast, it wasn't just Bridget's low popularity numbers in the West. There's proof that he was actively hated when it comes to those FGC fans specifically, with many outright disliking the character, thinking them offensive.
No, it's Bridget!
So Bridget from the get-go, as they were, was the perfect marketing tool for Japan, with Kantano specifically stating the character was picked due to the, and I quote, sluggish sales in Japan. But it remained that Bridget was not popular in the fighting game scene of the Western world. There were exceptions to this, of course. Some non-FGC brain players and many other weebs across the internet, myself included, would drive him to some niche popularity. But that's not who they needed to grab, so something needed to be done to change that, making this character a marketing juggernaut for both sides of the world. Now, put yourself in the shoes of these devs that were gunning for wide appeal. You had a character largely popular, with one of your most financially viable regions, yet he was unliked to the point of being deemed offensive by your other major region. Except the reason he was offensive was the key.
For characters that a large amount of people thought were transphobic, you're very bad at showing that. For starters, I'd like to talk about the fans. One of them, Rancing_trans, never accused the character of being offensive and instead just joked about the whole situation. The other two are bad, but they're nobodies by your own metric. Earlier we were talking about the Japanese fanbase, you love to show off the likes and retweets the posts were getting, showing that you just weren't cherry-picking the opinions of a few randos. Now compare that to here, where these posts have very little likes, almost as if these are unhinged statements set by the bizarre that very few people actually believe in. But it gets worse. Despite arguing that Bridget's offensiveness was a popular belief, you never show anything from before Bridget's addition to Strive. This was something that many people believed in, to the point that the Strive crew took notice of it and changed character because of that. And why is it that you can't seem to find people up in pitchforks ready to torch Gerald Daisuke from before? If anything, you show the opposite. Now tell me, when you see an entire room of people cheering for Bridget, do you really think that a vast amount of Guilty Gear fans thought she was offensive?
But those people weren't part of the FGC brain individuals Dimitri was talking about.
Someone says. Well, here's the thing. Those people were from a panel talking about both BlazBlue and Guilty Gear. I'm going to go off on a limb here and say that if someone who's attending a fighting game panel is pretty FGC brained, or maybe that term is just nonsense. What does it even mean to be FGC brained? is being a hardcore GG fan? Because that brings up a new issue. If these people are hardcore GG fans, so hardcore that they support a product that they hate, then why would the devs feel the need to change Bridget? If these people are those peak consumers you talked about earlier, then they surely would have brought it no matter what, because they love to buy stuff they hate on. Unless you're now saying that the people who will buy stuff because of tourneys and all that will suddenly quit the consumer lifestyle and not buy the character. If you're thinking that this sounds incredibly contradictory and stupid, then same. These inconsistencies are getting so bad that Dimitri is now contradicting himself mid-video. But if that is enough, I did do some digging and found the following. In a Western discussion of the JP Edward character polls, there were a lot of responses there, and while most of them wanted Disney and Biking, Bridget does show up quite a lot, and there are many responses agreeing with those individuals and even defending the character. In a video by Kizzy K, a longtime competitor in many Arxis-related titles, someone who would certainly fit the bill of the FGC brand description, Kizzy played Axel Core and wanted Bridget to come back. Or if you want more examples, Swim Cheesy, the guy you took most of your arcade mode footage from, uploaded his own thoughts on who's coming to Strive, and he wanted Bridget to come back. And if you look in the comments of both those videos, you'll find many of the people who agree with those sentiments. Again, if Bridget was hated before Strive, you do a piss poor job of showing that off, even worse showing that their modern hatred is anything worth listening to.
First time, the FGC scene itself seemed ecstatic over this character. In fact, this was probably the closest Guilty Gear had come to some mainstream attention since they made headlines back when they censored themselves for China.
Was the Taiwan incident really the first time Strive breached into the mainstream? Since you mentioned news articles, I'd like to point out that you've only shown one article about the subject. If this was the first time the game went mainstream, surely there'd be a huge swath of articles mentioning this. And in fact, you don't even mention who actually wrote the article, which is pretty important if you're talking about popularity. Was this a mainstream gaming website that's never talked about Guilty Gear before, or is this some random website you found? Well, the website is actually Kotaku, one of the biggest gaming publications out there. So while Dimitri didn't pick a rando, this actually further hurts his claim that this is the first time the game went viral. Kotaku has made several articles about Strive before the censorship and more after. You even showed this with Testament. So again, unless you show more proof that the Taiwan censorship was bigger than either of the rest of these articles, this claim is bogus. Actually, wait a minute. Can I argue that Dimitri focusing on one particular thing proves his point while ignoring anything else is a form of cherry picking?
I think it's inarguable that no matter your feelings, this was used as a marketing tool, and such an effective one at that. You began to even see the opinions of the character flip on their head in real time. When speaking of the FGC, I've been using a clip from player GekkoSquirrel, screaming and booing the announcement of Bridget, and you're probably wondering why I've chosen to highlight this guy specifically.
No, it's Bridget!
Well, simply put, he's the perfect example of this discussion. As the second Bridget was said to be trans, despite his prior views, he proceeded to make an entire video saying the character is beautiful and singing their praises. This is merely one example of so many people like this, and it's why I said in my original video that you're going to see nearly every Western creator follow along with this narrative, because even the ones who hate the character know what the correct response is.
While I've been accusing Dimitri of cherry-picking thoughts of the vid, and really soon to do so, it seems Dimitri is now dead set on becoming a farmer, because now he's strawmanning. Gekko's prior views on Bridget are glossed over, or more importantly, overrepresented with the clip shown, which, I'll admit, it's pretty funny. Shouldn't be considered the full story, especially when in the same video, he goes over his prior and past views on Bridget. In fact, Dimitri doesn't even show the clip of the supposed gushing. Let's remedy that, because it really has a number to disappoint here.
But first, I've got to eat my own words. About 2 months ago, I made a video discussing the characters I wanted in the second season of Guilty Gear Strive. At about 6:13, I say this line. For your favorites that I didn't mention, I either simply do not care or no. I do not know what I did to piss off Daisuke, but I'm glad he's having so much fun fucking with me. Bridget is the first character of Strive Season 2. They have very long-reaching buttons and is one of the only characters to have consistent Okizeme setups. Despite that, their play rate is pretty low compared to most characters, which I don't personally understand, it seems that they're everywhere on my timeline. Do I like playing Bridget? No, I don't. But there is something I have to admit. Strive Bridget is a very well-written character.
For someone who's supposed to be head over heels for Bridget, Gekko's acting, very normal here, even admitted to still not liking her. Dimitri presents Gekko as someone who had a sudden shift of opinion, and Gekko gives up more reasons why he's more a Bridget fan this time around, while some says not trying to argue he was always a fan of the character, because he knows that his prior older videos are public, that anybody can view them and recognize any attempt to lie about them. Gekko acknowledges that and explains the change in opinion, something that's a foreign concept to Dimitri, I'm sure. This is being framed as something way more shady than it actually is, but this has me thinking, didn't you earlier chastise new Bridget fans for claiming that the OG story is bad and offensive despite them not actually playing the game?
The dude in a dress, as many try to claim it was, specifically those people who have never previously interacted with the series until recently.
Since you said that, I'm willing to assume that you probably believe that people shouldn't just cast judgment on something without properly experiencing it or even get a shot. Heck, you even went back to give Strive another shot. So I'd say you believe that it's bad for people to blindly hate on something. Yet when Gekko decides to not just keep blindly hating on Bridget and give this new iteration a shot and likes it, you're now saying that he's lying. The name of the game here is Double Standards, and it shows that you don't actually care about what you're talking about. Now, I could believe that Gekko's change of opinion was done more to cash in on Bridget's new popularity if Dimitri, well, showed that opinion, but he doesn't. The full clip isn't shown, so why should anybody believe really anything about this whole segment? To bring up an old saying, you are the presenter. It's your job to properly present context to your audience. This isn't how you prove that somebody's lying, and you should know that. Here's an interesting clip from later on in the vid.
With my original coverage, many misrepresented my point.
You're aware of how bad it looks to not properly address someone's point, yet here you are, not properly addressing someone's point. You know, maybe it is that hard. But there's more here. See, let's just assume that Dimitri was right and Gekko is just a clout-chasing liar. You only bring up Gekko and nobody else. Why should anybody believe that multiple people are doing this? Going even further, what makes Gekko, of all people, a good representation of the FGC? You choose Gekko as just another Strive player, and that's the thing. He's just a Strive player. What makes him so special? Is he a massively popular figurehead in the FGC, like Maximilian Dude? Does Gekko normally represent what Strive players are feeling? Is he a pro player that's been playing Guilty Gear or Strive for years, like Hotashi or Romola? That one I can tell you isn't true, as he just started a series about him playing the game at a competitive level right before the Bridget video came out. Just like with Gekko's reasoning, we're surprisingly quiet when it comes to proving anything. Now, I know some people are going to argue that Dimitri provided examples in his other Bridget video, and thanks for bringing that up. Let's go watch it. Next time, please mention the people by name instead of having your audience play scavenger hunt with proving your point, especially when you have no problem doing that earlier. Yet another inconsistency. You know, at this point, I'm wondering if I made the wrong counter. Okay, I've dragged this on a lot. Let's bring up the other examples. In his OG vid, Dimitri cited J.M. Crofts and the previously mentioned Maximilian Dude. But here's where things get dicey. Guess what he said about them?
A bad route dialogue and are now going to declare they are trans. If you think otherwise, you're a transphobe. I can guarantee you any big creator in these spheres, any websites, it'll all follow suit, because they have to fall in line if they don't want to end up being harassed, or marked as some sort of bigot for even questioning.
There, he argues that the creators aren't changing their beliefs because of clout, but harassment. So which is it? Either the creators changed their beliefs due to a fear of harassment, or because they wanted to cash in on Bridget. The way you talk about Gekko makes it very clear that it's the latter reason, and that just shows how BS this point is. Once again, I have to ask, where's the proof? You show nothing that proves that either Max or J.M. Crofts hated Bridget before Strive, so how can you claim that they only like the character now? Or was Gekko harassed? Maybe as a result of the bullying clip, or maybe as a result of seeing others getting harassed? If he did, surely that could have somewhat shown that his change of opinion wasn't entirely due for good faith. Instead, with lack of proof of either claims, alongside their contrasting beliefs, I can only come to the conclusion that Dimitri is lying. There aren't that many creators suddenly switching up on Bridget because they never hated him in the first place. After this, Dimitri goes on to talk about the marketing of Bridget and it being overdone, and as much as I hate to say it, I agree with him, though I do want to point out one thing here.
The promotion of other characters, whether it's the series mascot or other new additions, post every tournament announcement, every crossover.
Your own screenshot shows other Guilty Gear characters, including the mascot of who you just said was getting pushed to the wayside. That crossover is from the game Tales of Arise, where Bridget appears alongside Ram, Soul, and Kai. I guess with Bridget being everywhere, I guess she also clogged the bottom part of your brain.
However, one has to ask, from the perspective of the franchise, is it even worth it? Well, looking at the numbers, Strive has received a consistent drop-off post Bridget's announcement, with very few recovery periods to speak of. That's not to say it's strictly because of Bridget, it's, as I said before, though Strive sold well initially due to marketing and tournaments, long-term player retention is going to plummet when you water down your game for the lowest common denominator, as even when it was the main event in EVO. Coming into the tournament, its Steam numbers were the lowest they had ever been up to that point, and immediately returned to dipping when its time in the spotlight passed, while other games from the show such as Tekken continued to grow. Hell, XR'd a few months back got an announcement that it would receive rollback netcode, resulting in its player and view count shooting over Strive's. The game didn't even get that netcode, yet players were just so hyped over the prospect of a better game in the series having a decent online experience.
So let's discuss those numbers for a sec. First of all, those after tournament numbers are normal. For fighting games, the player count spikes whenever new DLC is added, because more people come to the game when something new is added on. Revolutionary info, I'm sure. Looking at Tekken 7, its numbers are around 3,000 to 4,000 players, but spikes up whenever a new character releases. This isn't just some marketing Strive did, it's just a common thing for fighting games. I also want to add that Tekken 7 might have been a bad example. You attribute Strive's numbers being high due to the tournament, but it's more likely that and also because, well, got something new. 7 didn't get anything, so of course it's not going to have any significant drop-offs. These numbers are normal, but there's something more interesting I want to bring up. Despite claiming that the game had few recovery points, Dimitri doesn't show more Strive's numbers after October or even before Bridget. When your point is that Strive is doing more long-term damage to the franchise than good, it's kind of weird that you don't show any numbers before EVO to establish that the game is on a downward spiral. Looking at the dates pre-EVO, Strive was hitting around 2.5k players. Post-EVO, the game essentially went right back to normal after the spike. But when you look past the date Dimitri specified, you'll find that numbers went back up in November. But why is November even the cutoff? What happened to make that a good date? Keep in mind, Dimitri's video came out in June. If he really hates cherry picking, shouldn't he have picked a more closer time frame? Don't worry though, I'm here to once again do his work for him. Now I decided to pick a date from March to early May, as I'll assume that's when he finished writing this video. Looking at the numbers, we can see that the game is still managing to recover players and gain new ones. Moving on to Exerd, first, I'd like to point out that you bring up its viewer numbers instead of its player numbers. This is especially big as you go on to point out later in the video that a lot of the new Bridget fans haven't played the game and how bad that is that they don't care just to use viewer numbers. Viewers aren't people who played the game, so it's bad to claim the spike in new players as something good or natural, except for when it's not. No, I'm starting to run out of ways to say you're a hypocrite. I should have just made a counter. Wait, I already made that joke. Let's bring back those numbers because they show something that's been consistent. Dimitri's over-exaggeration. While Exerd did have higher numbers than Strive, it was only by 200 players. I guess not blowing Strive out of the water really dampens that idea that so many people wanted better, but it gets worse. Looking at the numbers during Exerd's beta period, Strive had significantly higher players, and right when Exerd's beta ended, Strive's numbers went back up. The people that hate Strive and wanted better immediately went right back to Strive. They really showed their anger, huh? That or they have severe case of Stockholm. But I don't really believe that the reason Exerd got so many players was due to a hatred of Strive in particular. It was a limited time beta. Of course more people are going to show up when you have only a limited amount of time to play something. Look at Samurai Showdown. I know this is a bit more modern, but still, it had a rollback beta that can get a massive influx of players. Do you think Dimitri's logic does that mean that everybody hated KOF 15, even though that game is still highly regarded among KOF fans? To better show this all, Dimitri says fans had no other ways of experiencing the Guilty Gear game with good netcode outside of Strive, but this is another moment where I have to question his familiarity with the franchise. Another Guilty Gear game did have rollback, and you constantly show it throughout your video. It's Plus R. That game had rollback before Strive and even had a beta that once again happened up with a massive influx of players. Starting to notice a trend here. But that game, the one that even had the better Bridget, didn't receive any new players at all during the draw marker, even after the Exerd beta period ended. If those fans really wanted better, then why are they ignoring the better game? Almost like the fans really didn't hate Strive to the extent you're making it out to be, or maybe games just get more players when they receive new content. Something that I've been saying for like 2 paragraphs. By the way, Dimitri, your script is so outdated that Exerd did receive that better netcode, which your own source even shows. And looking at the numbers, Strive still had higher player counts. You know what? Maybe it actually is Stockholm.
That's not the case for everyone though. And we can see the sentiment also present in the Arc System ecosystem, as 11 days after the Bridget drama, Toshimichi Mori, the creator of BlazBlue, left the company. While the specifics of why will probably never fully be known, he did leave on his own accord, and I think it's a fair assumption that it mostly came due to the direction the company has been going, as Mori's dislike for the Western scene has been pretty public, to the point where gaming websites made articles crying and pissing themselves about it, all on top of his own series being relegated to gotcha hell. From the outside looking in, Mori is a man who wants to chase his passions, and I don't think Arc System was offering those passions anything anymore.
You know what? Hold up. Let's change the scenery for this point. Much better. So when I first rewatched this video, this point is the one that caught my attention and caused me to research more into what Dimitri is saying and kind of led to me making this video. Dimitri, you didn't read the article. I know this because the very first paragraph has Mori admitting to making BB tag easier because he wants Western players to compete at EVO. This doesn't seem like the actions of someone who hates the Western scene. Quite the opposite. Later on, Mori admits to the dreaded global audience, yet you want to sweep that under the rug. Reading deeper into the interviews Mori had, I really don't think Mori would hate the direction ArcSys is going. In fact, you could argue that he helped pioneer that mindset that Strive would have. In those interviews, Mori mentions wanting BB tag to be a game where people of any skill level can just hop in and have fun. Nearly the exact same sentiment Daisuke had with Strive, yet Dimitri mentions none of that and makes it seem like he has the exact opposite opinion. I want anybody who is on the fence ready to tell me that I'm wrong for saying Dimitri is lying or cherry picking to start using their eyes, because this is the clearest example of him cherry picking and manipulating information to suit his beliefs. That point about Game Journal's pissing himself really does show that Dimitri never actually read any of these articles, because in that article, the journal was actually saying that simplifying your games is a bad approach to getting more Western players. The actual way to get more Western players would be through better netcode. Now, what was Dimitri spent so long throughout the video saying, including the very last one, that simplifying your games is bad, that the success of Exert getting rollback shows that better netcode would get more people to play your game. This is a golden example of just how massive Dimitri's double standards are. Since you're mocking the game journal, you clearly don't believe in anything you said about Strive. You think that making a product simpler is a great idea, and you're looking at his eyes for doing that because of code. But let's hit up that last point, shall we? Were the mainline BlazBlue games pushed aside in favor of gacha? Short answer, no. Long answer, while Dimitri does use BB Dark War, or the BBW as some may call it, BlazBlue's actually had various gacha/mobile games come out over the years. However, they almost always come out around a mainline BlazBlue game. Take BlazBlue Revolution Reburning, or BBRR. BlazBlue, I love you, but gosh, I hate your name sometimes. The last big gacha before BBW. It came out in 2016, technically 2015 if you count its release in Taiwan. BlazBlue Central Fiction came out the same year, twice the same year if you count the Taiwanese release in arcades in 2015, consoles in 2016. BBW was announced back in 2017, a year after the release of BlazBlue Central Fiction, and just a year later we would get BB Tag. As you can see, the games were never abandoned or pushed out of focus for gacha games that will die in a year. Almost every time they announced a mobile game, an actual fighting game came out not too long after. And, as a final nail in this coffin, BBW did come out in 2021. By the end of the year, it would be announced that both BlazBlue Central Fiction and BB Tag were receiving rollback netcode. The fighting games that were pushed aside in favor of gacha were given proper online before Guilty Year. Also, both games received the boosted player count as well, just in case you thought it was done at that point. Listen, I was really sad to see Mori leave. BlazBlue was one of the fighting games that really helped me get into the genre and the arc system works as a whole, and I'll definitely be looking out for the next thing he makes. But to see his departure twisted into something to attack ArcSys really shows that Dimitri doesn't really care about Mori and his work, and is just trying to use anything to validate his insane characters. Normally, I hate this phrase, but I feel like it's the most appropriate to use here. Stay away from my franchise, you tourist. Now, the next segment has Dimitri talk about the harassment that JP artists face, and I have nothing to say about that. It's bad, and none of the artists deserve to be lynched because they drew the character in a way somebody didn't like. While talking about that harassment, Dimitri decided to bring up Hogwarts Legacy. In particular, he brings up this.
Those activists, big YouTubers, political streamers, and websites all played defense, saying those individuals were never harassed, or putting the blame on those who were bringing attention to said harassment every single time.
So, blaming the harassment on something else is a bad thing. When Dimitri brought up the Western creators, he originally argued that they were harassed, just to then backtrack and say that they weren't. While it may not have been to the level of Pygmy or Silver, the heart of his claim here is that trying to pin the harassment on something else or handwave it is bad and just an attempt to gaslight you. If that's the case, then that would mean that the entire segment of Western creators was just Dimitri gaslighting you. Creators did face harassment, but Dimitri would rather blame something else. If that's the case, then we can just ignore this entire segment because we know that Dimitri doesn't actually believe in any of what he's talking about. He's only bringing up the Hogwarts Legacy situation and of course calling it bad because he knows that's the correct response to give. This isn't about stopping harassment, but just looking good. Again, I don't think the harassment for either the Hogwarts Legacy situation or the JP artists are justified, and I don't think he's even lying about the latter. But this contradiction makes it seem like you don't care, and I think we'd all agree that that's not true. Like, if you want to assume that he made up the harassment, that's still bad.
In both this segment and throughout the video, you've consistently got on a new Bridget fans for harassing old fans and making stuff up. Whether it's new fans questioning if old fans even like the character, or the dreaded cherry picking, but now Dimitri's showing a different side.
So, making stuff up is only bad when it affects you. Trying to lie about harassment is bad when it affects something you like. The contradiction here really only shows that you only care about these issues when it involves, well, you. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. As much as I want to call this section bad, I guess I can when he is technically right. The addict fallacy is real, and we're seeing it in action, folks.
The vile things I've seen are numerous. They don't even stop at the individual level either, often crossing over into xenophobic territory, when in this case, they instead target the entire nation of Japan as transphobic, or simply state that they are porn addicts, so of course they would want the character to be a boy, which is a conundrum I want to take a moment to dissect, as this whole "they're just porn addicts" angle of dismissal is used very often against anybody taking issues with the current trajectory of the character. But if you actually look at the numbers, what you find is in the 20 years of this character being a crossdresser, he had literally less than half of his current not safe for work post created. meaning it became over doubled in the few months the West considered them trans, according to an English site's statistics. You know the one.
But Rule 34 doesn't just catalog English artists, but anybody who uploads art of a character. And guess what you said earlier?
To the point where many have chosen to outright ignore them.
You've acknowledged that other artists are ignoring the change to just draw a character like nothing happened. Heck, you even show in your original video that an artist is drawing an SFW of Bridget and that artist is on the website. So can you truly blame the beast, or in this case, those who think Bridget is trans as the sole contributor to the increased art? And the worst part about this point is, I don't even think that it's entirely wrong, it's just that he was a really bad example. Shouldn't have used Rule 34, a site that anybody can upload anything to and is restricted to any specific region. Rather, why not use stuff like Western modding sites that have NSFW options that would better show off the idea that these Western Bridget fans are just as much of gooners as those who originally like character. I can't believe I just had to get a GED in gooning for this point, but I guess anything's possible at this point.
There is one last aspect of the grooming angle I'd like to discuss. It deals directly with those naysayers. We've established that many of these people try to force the transgender identity on any character that fits outside of gender norms. But this happens to real people as well, myself included. As such, you can probably come to the conclusion that this is why I take an even greater interest in this topic. But furthermore, after expressing my views previously, do you know the biggest video that was championed as a takedown on my own was made by a woman who, when I was coming off my troubled teen years, would literally refer to me publicly as an egg, a term for a closeted trans girl, only use female pronouns when speaking about me, and consistently insist I was trans despite my continued public statements that would say this was something that made me uncomfortable. It's not as if that was a singular case. Since that video, I've had new people do the same thing, between sending threats or fabricating stories and conversations with the express purpose of sidestepping my criticism.
So originally I wasn't going to cover this. I would have just agreed that Evelyn's video at least had to be made in some part with a bad mindset, and all or at least part of what she said in her video was clearly bad info or came from a biased source. That is until I realized that someone here would disagree with that notion. Dimitri. See, let's look at some of the things she said in her video and notice if they reframe parts of this video. In Evelyn's vid, she brought up that in your original video, you never clarified if you played Strive. Use that to argue why you got certain parts of Strive's story writing wrong.
There's another general problem with this video. One question that arose from this is, did Dimitri Monroe actually play Guilty Gear Strive? The answer seems to be a little bit, but he clearly didn't play the parts he talks about in this video. Let me explain. Dimitri has since attempted to revise this claim, saying, never really played it on PC, so I think I can refund it over there, in which he refers to the fact that you can refund any game on Steam that you bought in the last few weeks and played less than 2 hours of. He also adds that he played it on PS initially, did not like it, got it on PC when a character he liked was announced.
Guess what Dimitri clarifies in this vid?
One who is not at all competitive. I dropped Strive immediately on console and was only willing to give it a second chance on PC with Bridget's DLC, due to early excitement.
It's literally the exact same info. Or how about when Evelyn questions the legitimacy of the JP opinions?
Dimitri only cites 9 Japanese Twitter users, and that's if you include Wombat. Many of these are set together as a backdrop to specific claims very sparingly throughout the video. Additionally, many of the claims originate from non-Japanese sources. So if this video isn't entirely filled with a Japanese perspective, is the perspective of the Japanese people included at least significant? Like, are these people Guilty Gear veterans here to provide insight on the franchise? Are they cross-dressers and transgender people who are intimately aware of the culture? Are they bilingual experts of both languages who can convey what context is missing or what was changed? Are they at least general community figureheads who can be said to speak for many more than just themselves? None of this is made clear because they're never elaborated on besides a tweet or two.
In this vid, Dimitri goes to great lengths to show just how legit JP fans' opinions are, both from the outrage of the tweets to even cultural aspects, all to show why they should be taken seriously. And here's my personal favorite. One of the biggest things that Dimitri argues on in this video is that Bridget was supposed to be vague, but Dimitri doesn't mention something that he said in his original vid.
In Japan, it is frequently used with cross-dressing media. You know what Bridget is a part of.
Dimitri thinks that the devs intentionally made Bridget vague, yet when talking about the symbol, he drops the argument that it was a popular cross-dressing icon, even though it wouldn't make a lot of sense here. It would prove that the devs are being vague on purpose, or to support the idea that the devs not understand trans people as they intentionally picked a symbol that's never been used for trans characters. It even support why JP fans were so confused, as nothing about the character would indicate them being trans, but instead a femboy. Instead, Dimitri, like many other things, sweeps it under the rug, and I have to wonder why. Why not show something that will surely prove the naysayers wrong, unless somebody said something like...
He doesn't provide any examples of this. The picture he puts up on screen doesn't have the symbol. I don't think he did his research for this one, he just wanted to show a funny image and hoped we'd forget what was going on. People who are just doing their jobs, in this case better than Dimitri would have in the same situation, are malicious, apparently. And this is the same video where he rightfully calls out harassment of artists and fans.
If Evelyn was trying to pander to these people, then why would she even call them out? Heck, she even agrees with her points about artists being harassed. These actions don't make sense for someone who's trying to enforce the pink pill agenda. Now, I want to reiterate Granted, I'm not defending her previous actions in the past. She should have honestly addressed those things in her video. The fact that she didn't even bother to mention the prior history between y'all is really bad. While she did admit it after the fact, it doesn't really change anything. But the claim that Evelyn's video was just completely done in bad faith is really hard to prove when Dimitri himself is constantly taking criticism for that video. Is it that the video was bad, or that Dimitri just can't be bothered to actually address any criticisms from it? After this, Dimitri continues to talk about the bad behavior of new Bridget fans, arguing that they haven't played the game, and concludes his video. Nothing really worth covering, though I do want to point this out. When talking about biscuit stands and not knowing Guilty Gear lore, one of his favorite examples is somebody forgetting the character's name. If simply forgetting the names mean you don't know anything about the franchise, then I guess all of the things he said earlier during the arcade mode segment really does prove that he isn't a Guilty Gear fan. Anyway, it's time to finally end this thing.
Viewers, I want to ask you a question. If Dimitri and others were gaslit and lied to by seemingly everybody, then why is it that anytime they need to prove something, they end up lying in some way, shape, or form? Towards the end of the video, Dimitri used an image of a conspiracy theorist to represent his untangling of the lies, and he unintentionally came up with the perfect way to describe his video. At its core, a conspiracy theory is someone hearing something they've never heard of and deciding to make insane breaches instead of doing any actual research. This video is plagued by Dimitri being dishonest, whether it be lying about information, double standards, and just being so hypocritical that I have to wonder if he sold the script from somebody else. Dimitri's lying is already a problem, but gets worse when you remember that one of the main goals of the video was to show that the devs could have approached the situation in a way that wouldn't have caused so much drama. Dimitri's lying is not only contradictory to that goal, but actively harms it. He muddles the water on what things the devs potentially lied about and stuff he made up for some reason. You shouldn't have to make stuff up in order to prove that something's wrong. By doing that, you are admitting that the devs aren't 100% at fault for how the situation turned out. For all the talks of vague writing, this makes the situation really vague, and for what reason? You can still call out the harassment some people have received while also acknowledging that not everybody involved was a perfect little angel. All this shows is that Dimitri isn't trying to find the truth, but is actively ignoring it. An idea that has a lot more weight to it than you think. Let's revisit an earlier part of the video, specifically when discussing the TBS article. Dimitri brought up a quote that was supposed to be Kitano admitting the story was vague, but there's more to that quote that should really expose what Dimitri had in mind when making the video. Did you imagine there would be this much argument after her reappearance? To be blunt, we did expect it, or we did think it would be a topic there would obviously be disagreement on. Lengthwise, it's very short, but within the game's story, we wanted to illustrate how she lives, what she worries about, and how she thinks. However, a discussion really focused on this issue came first, and people who didn't buy the game and don't play the game really fanned the flames. We saw a lot more people misinterpreting the message we were putting out, and even going so far as to imitate us. Normally, we would just say that we want you to play the game and experience the story, our message is this, and we want you to understand it, even if each person might have a different interpretation. However, with people going so far as to impersonate us, we felt we had to make an official announcement. Claims to be anti-censorship. Censor stuff. While Dimitri wasn't wrong in saying the devs only released their statements due to harassment, he left out that they were the ones getting harassed. With this new context, we now know that Kitano wasn't admitting the story was vague, but was talking about how they don't like to ruin the experience of others by revealing a spoiler, but that they had to do that due to the large influx of harassment they were getting, alongside the large amounts of misinformation that was being spread. This is very clear to tell that Dimitri never had the intention of showing the truth, because that shuts down his major points. The story isn't vague, and it never was. The reason Dimitri had to edit so many articles together like that was because the devs were actually very consistent on the meaning of the story and their words. But it shouldn't be surprising that reading is hard for Dimitri and the like. I guess he wasn't wrong when he said that the fans were lied to, it's just that he forgot to mention that it was those fans that were spreading the lies. Those fake emails caught on like wildfire. It's not that big of a reach to say that people would have fallen for it. Case in point, Dimitri. Yes, Dimitri, in a now deleted tweet, shared those fake emails. Yet now he wants to shift the blame when the wrong people are doing the harassment. The real kicker to Dimitri's covering up of the harassment would be how it relates to what he said earlier.
It, as always, had been followed by the absurd lengths to astroturf any accountability when certain groups are involved.
Dimitri, of all people, should be the last person to get on others for not taking accountability. Let's go down the list. Dimitri shares fake emails and then quickly deletes them, and then doubles down and erases any mentions of the fake emails. How about the countless times he contradicted his prior vids? He could have addressed that info, but instead he just ignores it. I know I'm hammering the emails in, but when Dimitri spends so much time talking about how bad the harassment he and others received were, just for him to jump on the side of the harassment, it just feels wrong. Like, imagine if that email was written by someone who was pro-Strive Bridget and said she was trans. Do you think Dimitri would have deleted his tweets and cut so much stuff? No! That would have been the highlight of his video. I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to downplay the harassment that JP artists and others faced. What happened to them is awful. But when Dimitri erases any mention of the devs getting harassed just to preach about how terrible it is when others do it, then those sentiments just wind up feeling hollow and performative. The entire harassment spiel is nothing more than you trying to take the genuine harassment others have gone through and use it as a substitute for your points, or the lack of them. I think it's time to show another way that Dimitri's covering up of harassment ends up hurting the main message of his video. Dimitri spends a lot of time presenting to OG Bridget fans as innocent fans who are lied to, and while I've shown how that's not really accurate, this runs much deeper than you think. In another instance of Dimitri showing that harassment is good, actually, his example of those poor fans that harass for no reason were actually harassing others. In his first video, he highlighted how Brisket stands were spamming artists who didn't fall in line. If spamming artists is bad, then why are you making those harassers out to be just weirdo guys? I want to highlight the little lefty person, as they're in particularly awful. Not only did she double down and defend her harassment of the artist, but here's a fun tidbit about that artist, Riz. They are aware of Bridget pre-Strive as shown by an old art pack. They know the character from before, and they still like and enjoy them. But did Lefty know this? No! She just saw somebody enjoying the character and decided to harass them because they don't share her viewpoint. And guess who went on a whole tangent about how people should be allowed to enjoy characters without the fear of getting harassed? Is anybody surprised to find out that Dimitri is all buddy-buddy with people like Lefty? Like, so buddy-buddy that Dimitri's willing to borrow some of her talking points, like the China thing. Huh. Maybe the script was from somebody else. Again, I'm gonna say it's good to highlight the toxic behavior others have faced, but turning around and ignoring that same behavior just because it happens to be the people you dislike just sours that entire point. It's just another example of Dimitri's blatant double standards. But this hurts the argument that fans were harassed. Dimitri's mixing in genuine harassment with people who got rightfully called out for their nonsense. All that ends up doing is just devaluing the whole thing and making it easier for people to brush off the real harassment others have gone through. Though, there is something else that needs to be brought up here. Dimitri supports the devs' harassment. He made a conscious effort to twist their words and present details in a way that would make Daisuke and the crew look bad. One of the biggest reasons for faking the emails was to support a false position that Daisuke was on their side all along. What does Dimitri spend most of his video doing? Cherry picking and framing articles and posts to make it try and seem like the devs were on his side in order to support a false position. You add in Dimitri being very close to people who harass others, and it becomes clear that Dimitri is fine with harassment just as long as it's not a certain group he doesn't like. One group that Dimitri spends a lot of time glazing, defending, is the JP side. The JP side is portrayed as people who truly understand Bridget and were the most disrespected by the chains. With how highly Dimitri treats them, you could probably understand why he tried so hard to avoid the emails. It shows that the JP side is, in fact, the complete opposite of everything Dimitri wants you to believe. They don't understand the character. They were so delusional that they made up stuff in order to not sound so stupid, and were the ones who disrespected the developers. Dimitri's whole "the JP side decided to ignore the change" thing is looking really bad. After harassing the devs to the point of impersonation, spreading mass misinformation, when they found out the devs didn't bow down to them, they decided to just sweep all of their harassment under the rug. That's the problem with Dimitri's blind defense of all OG Bridget fans. He doesn't critically look at any viewpoints to determine if the anger is genuine or not. It's simply that the fans were mad, and that's a problem apparently. To once more repeat myself, I'm not saying that those people weren't harassed. Dimitri does a decent enough job showing that people took things too far. I'm glad Dimitri can say that racism is bad. Shame he has no issue letting other forms of bigotry slide. This image from earlier contains JP fans saying stuff so bad that even Dimitri had to censor it. Yeah, I joke about how ironic it is that somebody who's anti-censorship loves to censor stuff, but honestly, this is the exact behavior I expect from you. Dimitri spent so much time in both this video and the previous one arguing that trans people had no legitimate reason to label people as bigots other than as a way to control them or deflect criticism. And now, we know that they aren't. See, I do think it is bad to label anybody that has an issue with Strive and or Bridget as inherently bigoted. It just poisons the well. But Dimitri is well aware that some of the negative reception is entirely due to Bridget being trans and nothing else, yet he still chooses to paint those people as justified and someone worth listening to. I mean, listen to what he said in his previous vid.
That's the thing though. If it's not clear, while many will portray those that are upset as just being some sort of bigot, mad that the character isn't a femboy, let's think about that sentence for a moment. It doesn't make sense. bigots, homophobes, don't fight for the existence of feminine dudes.
If you're gonna say stuff like that, then at least try to act like you actually believe it. Also, for no reason in particular, I'd like to remind you that Dimitri argued that Evelyn Red's video shouldn't be seen as a genuine rebuttal to him because of her past actions. Dimitri is aware that people with bad motivations can make bad faith criticism, yet he still highlights those people. When Dimitri mentioned that certain groups of people like to dodge accountability, I really want him to mention what groups they are. Go on, I can wait. I think I've shown enough to cast some serious doubts that Dimitri made his video to expose the devs lying or stop harassment, but there's something else that needs to be addressed. Did Dimitri really do this for Bridget? Like before, something he said earlier is now starting to feel really dumb in hindsight. When discussing the history of Bridget, Dimitri brought up Guilty Gear Vestige, as that was Bridget's most recent appearance before Strive. This is what he says.
Bring him back into conflict with Bridget due to a bounty that has been put on Soul's head, as it would seem Bridget is back to his old job. Now, obviously the story isn't directly about Bridget, but we do get context to what the character has been up to post-accent core. Most importantly, living happily with his identity. Some specific lines, stating his desire to break down the villagers' perceptions, asserting that he's a man, not even wanting to be called cute or referred to as a girl because of that. Seemingly all of his previous traits are still here, with him being even more sure of himself.
When I first saw this, I had some questions. Questions like, why does such a large amount of text have so little of it actually translated? If a major argument against Dimitri was cherry picking, you'd think he would like to eliminate any doubters out there by translating the whole thing, or at least having a link to the full thing. But instead, he does nothing but add fuel to their arguments. A theory that may hold some water because there's some things here that aren't adding up. Dimitri clearly states that this is a post-accent core Bridget, but if that's the case, then why is Bridget saying stuff like, I want to break down my village's rules in order for me to go back there as being a boy? She already did that. We have literally seen her go back to the village with a big bag of money. Unless that scene was Bridget hallucinating after getting loaded by Robo-Kai, this can't be post-accent core. Allow me to shine some light onto some things. I managed to track down some more of the translated lines of this image, and while most of these quotes seem to be pulled from an introductory bio, there are some lines here that sound off for a post-accent core Bridget. It mentions things like how Bridget doesn't think she's suited for being a bounty hunter, and how she thinks she should look for a better job if she wants to get money for her family. How is this a Bridget who came back to bounty hunting if she's mentioning quitting it? This clearly isn't a post-accent core but pre-accent core version of the character. She's not happy with her identity, she's clearly unsure of what she should be doing, and while this is not only a blatant example of the cherry picking, this is also another instance of one of the main ideas that Dimitri talked about turning out to be full of crap. See, this lines up with the exact way Bridget was written in Strive. Her saying it's useless to try to be cute isn't a based identity moment, but Bridget actively ignoring or hiding her own feelings to act right for other people. Dimitri had said that none of this was planned, but this is clearly an attempt to change Bridget years before Strive was a thing. Just another lie for the pile. While we're at it, the whole idea that Bridget was changed for the West is starting to fall apart now. Daisuke did all of this in a game that was not even translated. Heck, Dimitri even stated that many Pachinko games do this, so you can't even argue he's trying to lie to people here. To go back to the question if Dimitri did this for Bridget, how did he try to do justice for the character that meant so much to him and fight back against the superficial fans? He removed so much context to make a quote of Bridget trying to erase a part of herself into something that's a good thing. He got onto the writing in Strive for being out of character just to avoid any mention of the topic here. If you really care about Bridget, then why is it that Dimitri actively tries to avoid engaging with the writing on a deeper level? Despite all of his claims on what the devs could have done, Dimitri's constant lying is an admission that there was nothing the devs could have done to make him accept the change because he just dislikes the very idea of Bridget being trans. This lack of engagement not only damages basically all of his arguments, but also Dimitri's prior views on femboy haters or femboy antis. There's multiple things that Dimitri would want you to take away from his video. Out of those ideas, I think the one about simply enjoying a character archetype stuck out to me, because that's the one that showcases just how bad Dimitri's actions are. It shows that those against femboys have taken statements drastically out of context to push the characters as trans, yet here he is taking entire games out of context to push the character as not being trans. Oh, those people like to lie about the creators? How awful. Anyway, here's Dimitri trying to tell you that the entire development team, down to the voice actors, are lying to you. Despite Dimitri claiming that trans Bridget only worsened the case for femboy enjoyers, I'd argue that he's the one doing that. He's out here validating all of those actions that he once rightfully called out for being toxic. He's telling people that they're right to do those things. Since Dimitri loves to talk about the past, let's go there one last time. Going back to the localization video, he brings this up.
And to make it clear, it's not an issue of the politics in particular. My opinions on them are completely irrelevant. If we had them in reverse, and I was seeing words like chud mockingly show up in this media instead of SJW, I would be cringing just as hard.
Even if localizer starts to use phrases that he personally liked, that still wouldn't make their actions justified. Unrelated memes, political references, and the author's words would still be getting thrown away just from somebody he agrees with. The core problem would still be there, however. That's the message I'd like to leave you with. The discussion of fanboy characters won't get better if you're unwilling to stop that bad behavior that these talks seem to bring. All you're doing is defending the people who, according to your logic here, don't actually care about Bridget. They want the character to stay as the one thing they box them in as, and it's your problem if you dare try to correct them. I get the angle of wanting to give those simboy antis a taste of their own medicine. Heck, I've spent most of this video saying hypocrisy, laugh, but this is less of a taste and more of an overdose. If you aren't willing to call out the bad behavior, then nothing's going to change. This stuff is just going to keep happening forever and ever, keeping the discussion toxic. Ultimately, if you really want to stand by your beliefs and show that you actually care for these characters, then do it. Otherwise, you're showing that it was never really about them, and you only did it for reasons that are much more shallow. In the end, I can't say that Dimitri's video was a complete flop. It set out to show that Bridget fans were gaslighting and harassing anybody that didn't share their beliefs, and it did exactly that. But don't forget, as Dimitri proudly presents, he represents what the true fans are. I've been Blades, and until next time.